Danny Harper stood at the boarding gate and held his small travel bag tight in his hands, his heart pounding with excitement and fear, all mixed together like a storm inside his chest. The 12-year-old boy looked small, even for his age, but his eyes burned with determination that made the alien officers take notice when he passed by them. Beside him stood Kira, massive wolf-like creature whose shoulder reached higher than Danny's head and whose silver-gray fur seemed to shimmer under the station's artificial lights. The bond between boy and beast was obvious to anyone who watched them. Kira's golden eyes never left Danny for more than a moment, and Danny's hand rested naturally on her back, as if drawing strength from her presence. They had arrived at the Galactic Training Initiative Station 3 hours ago, and already the reactions from other species made Danny's stomach twist with worry. A group of insectoid cadets had screamed and scattered when Kira walked past their gathering area. A reptilian officer had drawn his weapon before Commander Lisa Grant stepped in to explain that Kira was not a threat but a guardian now. Danny and Kira waited in the main hall while Lisa argued with Ambassador Vexter about whether Kira could even stay on the station. "This is highly irregular." Vexter clicked through his translator device as his compound eyes fixed on Kira with obvious distrust. "We have never allowed predatory animals on this station. The liability alone is enormous." Lisa crossed her arms and met the insectoid ambassador's gaze without backing down. "Guardian beasts are part of human military tradition," she said firmly. "They have served alongside human soldiers for thousands of years, and the bond between a human and their guardian is sacred in our culture. Sacred or not, that creature could kill half the cadets on this station." Vexter's mandibles clicked in agitation. "She won't." Danny spoke up suddenly, and both adults turned to look at him. The boy's voice was steady despite his nervousness. "Kira has been with me since I was 6 years old. She would never hurt anyone unless they tried to hurt me first." Vexter studied the small human child and the massive beast beside him. The contrast was almost comical, yet something in the way they stood together made even the ambassador pause. "The boy speaks truth." A new voice entered the conversation, and everyone turned to see a tall Xanthari approaching them. The Xanthari were known across the galaxy as brilliant scientists and philosophers. Their crystalline skin refracted light in beautiful patterns, and their three-fingered hands moved with elegant precision. This particular Xanthari introduced himself as Science Officer Talvin, and he had been observing Danny and Kira for the past 20 minutes with great interest. "I have studied human culture extensively," Talvin said as his voice resonated like wind chimes. "The guardian beast tradition is not simple pet ownership. It is a partnership forged through generations of evolution and mutual trust. You support allowing this predator to remain?" Vexter asked with surprise in his tone. "I support respecting the customs of member species," Talvin replied smoothly. "Besides, I have a proposal that might satisfy everyone's concerns." The Xanthari explained that his science vessel, the Infinite Meridian, was departing in 3 days for a week-long research mission through the nearby sectors. He offered to take Danny as a guest cadet. Great honor for someone so young, and the experience would be invaluable for the boy's training. The catch was that Xanthari regulations did not permit non-sentient creatures aboard their ships. For safety and religious reasons, Danny's heart sank as he understood what this meant. He would have to leave Kira behind. Lisa looked conflicted. This was an incredible opportunity that could advance Danny's career significantly, but she knew how strong the bond was between guardian and human. "Danny, you don't have to accept," she said gently. "No one will think less of you if you choose to stay with Kira." The boy looked down at his guardian, and Kira looked back at him with those knowing golden eyes. He could feel her steady presence in his mind, a warmth that had been there for so long he couldn't remember life without it. But he could also feel her encouragement pushing him toward this chance. "It's only 7 days," Danny said quietly, as he ran his fingers through Kira's fur. "I can do 7 days." Kira made a low sound in her throat. Not quite a whine, but close, and pressed her massive head against Danny's chest. The boy wrapped his arms around her neck and buried his face in her fur while fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. Lisa placed a hand on Danny's shoulder and spoke with quiet understanding. "Guardian beasts know when their humans need to grow. Kira wants you to take this opportunity, even though it hurts to be apart." The next 3 days passed too quickly for Danny's liking. He spent every possible moment with Kira, sleeping beside her in his quarters, eating meals while she lay at his feet, and walking the station's observation decks while she paced beside him. Other cadets began to warm up to Kira. After seeing how gentle she was with Danny, some even asked to pet her, and Kira tolerated their attention with patient dignity that made Danny proud. On the morning of his departure, Danny stood in the docking bay with his bag packed and ready while Kira sat beside him with her ears flat against her head. "I'll be back in 7 days," Danny whispered as he hugged her one last time. "That's all, just 7 days, and then we'll be together again. I promise." Kira licked his face and made a soft whimpering sound that tore at Danny's heart. Lisa had to gently pull the boy away and guide him toward the Xanthari shuttle, while Kira watched with eyes that seemed to understand everything as the shuttle door closed. Danny pressed his hand against the window and watched Kira until the station disappeared from view. First 3 days aboard the Infinite Meridian were amazing beyond Danny's wildest dreams. The Xanthari crew treated him with kindness and curiosity. They showed him their advanced laboratories, explained their research on subspace anomalies, and even let him help with minor tasks. Danny recorded messages for Kira every night, even though he couldn't send them until they returned to the station. He wanted her to see everything he was learning and experiencing. On the 3rd night, Danny was giving a video tour of the ship's observation deck when the lights suddenly flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in moments later, but something felt wrong. The usual hum of the ship's engines had gone silent, and the air felt heavy with tension. "Stay here," Talvin told Danny as he rushed toward the bridge. Danny waited in the darkened corridor with his recorder still running, but after several minutes of hearing nothing except distant shouts and the sound of systems failing, fear began to creep up his spine. Back at the training station, Kira suddenly lifted her head from where she had been lying in Danny's empty quarters. Her ears stood straight up, and a low growl rumbled from deep in her chest. Something was wrong, and she could feel it through the bond that connected her to Danny. Across the void of space, Lisa found Kira pacing frantically outside the communications room an hour later, and the Wolf's agitation was so intense that other officers were keeping their distance. "What's wrong, girl?" Lisa asked, but she already suspected the answer. The communication officer emerged with a grim expression on his face. "Commander Grant, we've lost contact with the Infinite Meridian. Their last transmission cut off mid-sentence and all tracking beacons have gone dark." Lisa felt ice form in her stomach as she looked at Kira, whose golden eyes were fixed on the viewport, as if she could see through the station walls and across the light years to where her boy was lost in the darkness. Kira threw back her head and howled, a sound so full of anguish and rage that every being on the station stopped what they were doing and listened as the guardian beast mourned for her missing human. The hunt had begun. The evacuation pod was never designed for a creature like Kira, but she made it work through sheer determination and intelligence that surprised even herself. Her massive paws manipulated the control panels with surprising delicacy, pressing buttons and pulling levers based on instinct and something deeper that she couldn't name but trusted completely. The pod launched from the training station while alarms blared and security officers shouted for her to stop. But Kira paid them no attention, because every fiber of her being was screaming that Danny needed her. Lisa watched from the command center as the pod's trajectory appeared on the screens, and her hand hovered over the emergency recall button before she slowly lowered it again. "Let her go," Lisa whispered to herself. If anyone can find him, it's her. The Galactic Council officials were less understanding when they learned what had happened to Ambassador. Vexter's mandibles clicked furiously as he demanded to know how a simple animal had breached station security and stolen an evacuation pod. She's not a simple animal, Lisa said quietly but with steel in her voice. And she didn't steal anything. She's going after her human, because that's what Guardians do. The Council declared both the Xanthari ship and Kira lost causes within 24 hours official. Search and rescue efforts would continue for another week, but hopes were not high. Lisa refused to accept this and sent an urgent message to Earth Fleet requesting assistance. The response came faster than she expected. Commander Kyle Morrison would arrive within 3 days with a full search and rescue team equipped with the best tracking technology humanity possessed. Meanwhile, Kira traveled through the cold void of space in her tiny pod and survived on the emergency rations stored in the compartments beneath the seats. She couldn't read the labels, but her nose told her which packets contained food and which contained medical supplies or tool. Sleep came in brief snatches because the bond with Danny pulled at her constantly. She could feel his fear like a cold stone in her chest, and occasionally flashes of his emotions would surge through the connection so strongly that she would whimper and press harder on the controls to increase speed. The pod's navigation system had been programmed with the last known coordinates of the infinite meridian, and when Kira finally arrived at that location, her heart sank at what she found. Debris floated in all directions. Twisted pieces of hull plating, shattered equipment pods, and worst of all, frozen bodies of Xanthari crew members who had been ejected into space during whatever catastrophe had befallen the ship. Kira's keen eyes scanned the wreckage, and her sensitive nose pressed against the viewport as if she could smell through the vacuum, and then she felt it. A tug in the bond that pointed her in a specific direction. Danny had been here, but he was no longer here. The trail led away from this graveyard and toward something else. She maneuvered the pod through the debris field and discovered a functional Xanthari escape pod drifting among the wreckage using the pod's mechanical arms. Another control system she figured out through trial and error. Kira grabbed onto the escape pod and forced open its external access panel. Inside, she found survival suits and, more importantly, a navigation console that showed recent flight paths. The escape pod had been programmed to head toward a location in the Kelmer Nebula, a place that Kira's pod's database flagged with warning symbols she couldn't read but understood meant danger back at the training station. Commander Kyle Morrison arrived with his team and immediately sought out Lisa. He was a tall man with gray hair and stern features, but his eyes showed genuine concern when he asked about Danny. The kid's only 12, Kyle said as he studied the star charts showing the last known locations. And now you're telling me his guardian beast went after him alone? She didn't give anyone a choice, Lisa replied. I've never seen anything like it. She operated controls that should be impossible for a non-human to understand. And she launched that pod with perfect trajectory calculations. Kyle shook his head in amazement. The bond between humans and guardian beasts has always been strong, but this is something else entirely. So what do? Lisa asked. We follow the trail, Kyle said firmly. If Kira can track Danny across light years, then we can track both of them, and when we find them, we bring them both home. The human search team departed within hours and began retracing Kira's path through space. They found the debris field and confirmed that the infinite meridian had been attacked by pirates. The damage patterns were consistent with boarding actions rather than combat destruction. They wanted the ship intact, one of Kyle's officers reported, which means they took prisoners, including Danny, Lisa said as dread filled her voice. Kyle placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then, we find the pirates and we get him back. It's what we do. Meanwhile, Kira had reached the Kelmer Nebula and found exactly what she had feared. A massive hidden station built into an asteroid and surrounded by ships. Bearing the marks of various pirate clans, the station's sensors would have detected her pod immediately if she had approached directly. So Kira did something that surprised even herself. She shut down all pod systems except life support and let the pod drift into the nebula's outer edge, where it would look like just another piece of space junk for 3 days. She drifted and watched and learned the patterns of the patrol ships and the comings and goings of various vessels. Her stomach growled with hunger and her throat burned with thirst. But she ignored these discomforts because the bond told her that Danny had been here. His presence lingered in her mind like a ghost on the 4th day. A maintenance crew came out to clear debris from the station's outer perimeter, and Kira saw her Chanshi powered up the pod's maneuvering thrusters, just enough to drift closer to the station. And when the maintenance ship opened its cargo bay to collect scrap metal, Kira's pod was pulled in along with everything else. The moment the bay doors closed and atmosphere returned, Kira burst from the pod and took down the 3 surprise pirates before they could even reach their weapons. She didn't kill them. Her teeth closed on throats without crushing, and her claws raked across arms without severing, because Danny wouldn't want her to kill unless absolutely necessary. The pirates lay unconscious, and Kira dragged them into a storage locker before sealing it shut. She moved through the maintenance ship and found a venting shaft that led deeper into the vault station. Her powerful muscles pulled her through spaces that would have been tight even for a human inside the pirate station. Chaos and noise filled every corridor. Aliens of a dozen different species shouted at each other, weapons discharged in what sounded like fights or celebrations, and the smell of unwashed bodies and stale air made Kira's nose wrinkle. She stayed in the shadows and the ventilation system, moving like a ghost through the station while following the bond that pulled her toward Danny's last location and a holding area deep in the station's lower levels. Kira found cages filled with prisoners, including several Zentari who looked up in shock when the massive wolf appeared above them in the vent opening. "Please," one of the Zentari whispered in accented human standard. "Help us. The pirates will sell us as slaves if we stay here." Kira dropped down from the vent and approached the cages while the prisoners shrank back in fear until they saw her examine the lock mechanisms with obvious intelligence. She bit down on the electronic lock panel and pulled until it sparked and died. The cage door swung open. The freed Zentari stared at Kira in amazement. "You're the guardian beast, the one who belonged to the human boy." Kira's ears perked up, and she moved closer to the Zentari, who had spoken, her eyes intense and questioning. "The boy was here," the Zentari said quickly, "but they sold him 3 days ago to a Krell collector, a noble named Tormak, who pays well for rare specimens." Kira's lips pulled back from her teeth in a snarl that made every prisoner in the room press against the far walls of their cages. "The Krell territories are 3 sectors away," the Zentari continued nervously. "You'll never reach him in time. Tormak's estate is a fortress." But Kira was already moving. She tore open the other cages and gestured for the prisoners to follow her before bounding back toward the maintenance bay behind her. The freed prisoners looked at each other in confusion before scrambling to follow the guardian beast, who had just saved their lives. Kira led them to the maintenance ship, and somehow through gestures and growls and sheer force of will made them understand that they needed to pilot the ship away from the station as alarms began to sound and pirates realized their prisoners were escaping. The maintenance ship blasted free from the docking clamps and raced toward open space. The Zentari pilot who had agreed to help looked back at Kira with awe in his crystalline features. "You're going after your human alone, you know the Krell will kill you?" Kira met his gaze with golden eyes that burned with determination and something deeper, something that spoke of bonds that could never be broken, and loyalty that transcended species. The Zentari nodded slowly as understanding dawned. "Then we will send word to your people. We will tell them where you have gone and hope that help arrives in time." Kira pressed her nose against the viewport and stared at the stars. Ahead, somewhere out there in the vast darkness, Danny was waiting, and nothing in the galaxy would stop her from reaching him. Danny sat in what could only be described as a gilded cage and tried not to show how scared he really was. The cage itself was beautiful in a terrible way. Bars made of some crystalline material that shimmered with inner light, a soft sleeping platform that adjusted to his body temperature, and even a viewing screen that showed him images of Earth's forests and mountains. But beauty didn't change the fact that he was a prisoner in the private collection of a Krell noble who saw him as nothing more than an interesting specimen. Tormak visited twice each day to observe Danny and take notes on his tablet while asking questions through a translation device. "How does your species bond with non-sentient predators?" Tormak would ask in his clicking, hissing language that the translator rendered into flat standard. "Do all human children show this level of courage, or are you exceptional? What makes your kind believe they deserve a place among the galactic civilizations?" Danny answered some questions and refused others. He wouldn't give this creature the satisfaction of seeing him break down. But at night, when the lights dimmed and Tormak left him alone in the vast collection room surrounded by cages holding other stolen beings, Danny would curl up on the platform and press his hand against his chest, where he could still feel the faint echo of Kira's presence through their bond. Connection had grown weaker with distance, but it was still there, a tiny flame of warmth that told him Kira was alive and searching for him. "Please find me," Danny whispered into the darkness. "Please don't give up." Meanwhile, Kira traveled through space in a ship she had taken from a smuggler, who made the mistake of landing at a refueling station where she was hiding. The smuggler would wake up in a few hours with a headache and a story nobody would believe about a giant wolf who operated his ship's controls better than he did. Kira pushed the engines as hard as they would go and ignored the warning lights that flashed across the console. She had learned to read basic symbols during her time in space, and she knew red meant danger, but she didn't care. The bond with Danny grew stronger with each passing hour, and she could feel his fear and loneliness calling to her like a beacon through the void. When she crossed into Krell territory, their border patrol ships immediately detected her presence and demanded she power down her engines for inspection. Kira's response was to divert all power to the engines and execute a series of evasive maneuvers that would have impressed even experienced pilots. The Krell ships pursued, but Kira knew something they didn't. She wasn't flying blind, but following a connection that told her exactly where she needed to go. She led the patrol ships through an asteroid field and lost them in the chaos before emerging on the other side with her shields barely functional and her hull showing scorch marks from near misses. Coordinates in her mind, or rather in her heart, led her to a remote moon orbiting a gas giant at the edge of Krell. Space scanners showed a single massive structure on the moon's surface. Tormak's private estate. Kira landed the damaged ship in a crater several kilometers from the estate and approached on foot, or rather on paw. The moon's atmosphere was thin but breathable, and the gravity was slightly heavier than Earth standard, but Kira adapted quickly. She spent hours observing the estate from hiding and learning its patterns. Guard patrols every 20 minutes, automated defense turrets on the outer walls, and a shield generator that hummed with power as the moon's sun set and darkness covered the land. Kira made her move. She approached from downwind so the guard creatures, massive reptilian beasts that the Krell used for security, wouldn't catch her scent until it was too late. When the first guard beast turned the corner and spotted her, Kira was already in motion. She hit it low and hard, using her momentum and the creature's surprise to knock it off balance before her jaws closed on its throat. Not to kill, but to cut off its air until it fell unconscious. 3 more guard beasts came running at the sound of their packmate's distress, and Kira fought them with a ferocity born of desperation. Claws raked across scales. Her teeth found vulnerable spots between armor plates, and her powerful muscles allowed her to dodge and weave around attacks that would have killed a lesser creature within minutes. All 4 guard beasts lay unconscious, and Kira stood over them. With her sides heaving and blood dripping from shallow wounds on her shoulders and flanks, she didn't pause to tend to her injuries, but continued toward the estate's outer wall. The shield generator was housed in a small building separate from the main structure. Kira could hear its steady hum and see the faint shimmer of the energy field it projected. She circled the building until she found a ventilation grate and tore it free with her claws, before squeezing through the narrow opening inside. The machinery was complex and alien, but Kira had learned that most technology had weak points, places where power conduits clustered or control systems were exposed. She bit down on a bundle of thick cables and pulled until they tore free from their housing. Sparks flew, and alarms began to wail as the shield flickered and died. Guards poured from the main building, and Kira ran not away from them but toward them, straight at the now vulnerable entrance. The guards raised their weapons, but hesitated at the sight of this massive predator charging at them with no fear in her eyes. That hesitation cost them precious seconds, and Kira was among them before they could fire. She moved like a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws, taking down guards with precise strikes that disabled without killing. One guard managed to fire his weapon, and the energy bolt burned across Kira's ribs, but the pain only made her faster and more determined. She burst through the main entrance and into the estate's interior, following the bond that now burned like fire in her chest because Danny was close. So close, the collection room was on the 3rd level, and Kira bounded up staircases and through corridors, while more guards tried to stop her. She left a trail of unconscious Krell in her wake, and by the time she reached the collection room's sealed door, alarms were screaming throughout the entire estate. Kira threw her full weight against the door, and it buckled under the impact. She hit it again and again until the locking mechanism shattered and the door flew open. The collection room was enormous and filled with dozens of cages holding beings from across the galaxy. But Kira's eyes found only one. Danny stood at the front of his cage with tears streaming down his face and his hands gripping the crystalline bars. "Kira!" he shouted, and his voice was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Kira crossed the distance in 3 bounds and slammed into the cage with enough force to crack the crystalline bars. She bit down on the damaged section and pulled until the bars bent and broke, creating an opening just large enough for Danny to squeeze through. The boy threw his arms around Kira's neck and sobbed into her fur while she pressed her massive head against him and made soft whining sounds of relief and joy. "You found me," Danny whispered. "I knew you would. I never stopped believing." Their reunion lasted only seconds before Tormak himself entered the room with a squad of heavily armed guards. The Krell noble was larger than his guards, nearly 3 meters tall, with dark scales and cold eyes that fixed on Kira with obvious anger. "That specimen cost me considerable resources," Tormak hissed. "And you have damaged my property and injured my guards. You will both pay for this insult." Kira stepped in front of Danny and lowered her head while her lips pulled back to show her teeth. The message was clear. "You'll have to go through me first. Kill the beast, but take the human alive." Tormak commanded his guards. The guards raised their weapons, but before they could fire, a new alarm began to sound, this one different from the others. A voice came through the estate's communication system. "This is Commander Kyle Morrison of Earth Fleet. We are in orbit above this moon with warships, and we demand the immediate release of Cadet Danny Harper." Tormak's scales paled slightly as he realized the situation had become much more complicated outside the estate. The Krell military was also arriving, drawn by reports of a human military presence in their territory. What had started as a simple retrieval mission was rapidly becoming a diplomatic incident that could spark conflict between multiple galactic powers. Danny climbed onto Kira's back and held tight to her fur as she positioned herself near a window, ready to run or fight, depending on what happened next. Tormak looked between the boy, the beast, and the communication console before making a decision that would change everything. Seal the estate, he ordered. No one enters or leaves until this matter is resolved through proper channels. As the heavy security doors began to close and lock throughout the building, Kira and Danny found themselves trapped but together. The boy leaned down and whispered in Kira's ear, "Whatever happens next, we face it together." Kira's tail moved in a slow wag that conveyed both agreement and determination. They had found each other across the vast emptiness of space, and nothing would separate them again. The battle was brutal and beautiful in equal measure, as Kira fought with every ounce of strength and intelligence she possessed. Rakor was powerful but slow. His massive size worked against him when facing an opponent who relied on speed and strategy instead of brute force. Kira circled and darted in to deliver quick strikes. Before retreating, her teeth found gaps in the armor plating, and her claws raked across vulnerable joints. But Drakor was experienced and patient. He waited for his moment, and when Kira came in for another attack, his tail whipped around and caught her across the ribs with devastating force. Kira went flying and hit the ground hard, enough to raise a cloud of dust. Danny screamed and tried to climb over the railing, but Kyle held him back while Lisa watched with tears streaming down her face. "Get up," Danny shouted. "Please get up." Kira rose slowly, her sides heaving and blood dripping from her mouth, but her eyes still burned with determination. She had crossed galaxies to find Danny, and she would not fail him now. The fight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Both combatants showing signs of exhaustion and injury. Drakor's movements became slower and his breathing labored while Kira's legs trembled with each step. The arena had gone completely silent, as thousands of beings watched these two champions push themselves beyond normal limits. Then Drakor made his final charge, putting everything into one last attempt to crush his opponent. Kira waited and watched, and at the last possible moment, she dropped low and rolled beneath the massive creature's body. Her jaws closed on the soft underside where armor couldn't reach, and Drakor roared in pain and surprise when he tried to turn to face her. His injured leg gave out, and the massive champion crashed to the ground. Kira could have killed him, then her teeth were positioned perfectly to tear out his throat. But instead, she simply held him down until he stopped struggling and made a sound of submission. The arena erupted in shocked noise as beings from 100 different species tried to process what they had just witnessed. Setarak's face showed disbelief and anger, but he was bound by honor to accept the outcome. The beast shows mercy? One Krell elder asked with obvious surprise in his voice. She won, but did not kill. Another added, "There is honor in such restraint." Vexter declared Kira the victor, and Danny broke free from Kyle's grip to run into the arena. He threw himself at Kira, and the exhausted wolf collapsed with the boy wrapped around her neck, while both of them shook with relief, and joint medical teams rushed forward to treat both combatants. And even Drakor's handler seemed impressed by Kira's fighting skill, and Mercer Tormak approached slowly with his head held lower than before, a sign of submission in Krell culture. "The human child is yours to reclaim," he said to Kyle, "and I withdraw all claims of ownership or restitution." "Smart move," Kyle replied coldly, but the Krell elder who had commented on Kira's mercy stepped forward and studied the wolf and the boy with thoughtful eyes. "We have underestimated humanity," the elder said. "Your species brings something rare to the galaxy, the understanding that strength without honor is worthless." Over the following weeks, Danny and Kira recovered together in the medical bay of Kyle's flagship. The bond between them seemed even stronger after their ordeal, and everyone who saw them together could feel the depth of their connection. Galactic news channels carried the story of the guardian beast who had crossed the stars to save her human, and the fight that Deus had proven humanity's worth. Other species began to look at humanity with new respect, not just for their technology or their military power, but for their capacity for loyalty and love. Galactic Council issued a formal apology to humanity, and establish new protocols that would prevent similar incidents in the future. Human bonded pairs could no longer be forcibly separated during training or diplomatic missions. Ambassador Vexter visited Danny personally to apologize for the role his decisions had played in the disaster. I did not understand the depth of your bond with the beast. Vexter admitted, I treated something sacred as mere animal attachment, and for that I am truly sorry. Danny forgave him because that was what Kira would want, mercy and understanding instead of continued anger. The Zentari sent a delegation, led by Talvin, who brought gifts of advanced medical equipment and offered to establish formal alliance. Treaties with humanity. Your guardian beast saved my crew when she could have simply continued her search. Talvin explained, she showed that humans value all life, not just their own, and we wish to learn from such wisdom. The biggest surprise came from the Krell Empire itself. The elder, who had witnessed Kira's mercy, arrived with an honor guard and presented Kira with a crystal medallion that marked her as a warrior of worth in Krell tradition. This has never been given to a non-Krell. The elder said, but you have earned it through combat and through the restraint you showed in victory. Even more shocking, the elder revealed that some Krell families had begun adopting companion animals and learning about the bonding practices that humans had perfected over millennia. You have taught us that intelligence and worth come in many forms. The elder continued, and that the measure of a civilization is not its weapons, but its capacity for loyalty and honor. When Danny and Kira returned to the training station, everything had changed. Other cadets approached with curiosity instead of fear and asked to meet Kira. Properly alien children begged their parents for companion animals of their own after hearing stories about the great wolf who had saved her human commander. Lisa Grant was promoted to head a new Guardian program that would integrate bonded pairs from Earth into the galactic training system. Dozens of human families had already applied with their guardian beast dogs, wolves, and even a few humans bonded with other Earth predators. You two started something incredible, Lisa told Danny as they stood in her new office. The galaxy is changing because of what you showed them. We didn't mean to change anything, Danny replied while running his fingers through Kira's fur. We just wanted to be together. That's exactly the point, Lisa said with a smile. The bond between human and guardian isn't about grand gestures or political statements. It's about love and loyalty that exists simply because it should. Kyle Morrison stopped by before departing with Earthfleet, and he knelt down to look Danny in the eyes. You know what you two did? Kyle asked. You proved that humanity belongs out here among the stars. Not because we're the strongest or smartest, but because we understand something that many species have forgotten. What's that? Danny asked. That the bonds we choose to honor define us more than the battles we win. Kyle replied as the weeks turned to months. Danny and Kira resumed their training together, this time with Kira receiving her own education in ship operations, emergency procedures, and diplomatic protocols. The wolf proved to be a quick learner, and her actions during her solo journey had already demonstrated intelligence that surprised even the most advanced alien species. Other guardian beasts began arriving at the station, and soon there was a whole pack of them training alongside their humans. Danny watched as alien cadets cautiously approached these Earth predators and learned to recognize the difference between a threat and a protector one. Young insectoid cadet asked Danny how humans had learned to trust such dangerous creatures. We didn't learn to trust them, Danny explained. We grew up together. Humans and wolves evolved side by side for thousands of years until we became family. But they could hurt you, the young cadet pointed out. Danny looked at Kira, who was patiently allowing a group of small aliens to examine her teeth and paws while she lay still. Kira could hurt me, Danny agreed. But she never would, not because I trained her or control her, but because she chooses loyalty every single day. The young cadet thought about this and then asked the question that many species were beginning to ask themselves. Could my species develop such bonds? Danny smiled and nodded. I think any species can if they're willing to open their hearts. It just takes time and trust, and the understanding that some relationships are partnerships instead of ownership. As the sun set on the training station, Danny and Kira stood together on the observation deck and looked out at the stars. They had been separated by space and distance, and the cruelty of those who saw worth only in power and profit, but their bond had proven stronger than all of it. A connection forged not in a single moment, but in thousands of small acts of love and loyalty over years of growing up together. Ready for our next assignment? Danny asked while reading the message that had just appeared on his tablet. They were being sent to explore a newly discovered sector where potential allies might be waiting to join the galactic community. Kira's tail wagged in excitement and anticipation together. They would face whatever challenges came next, a boy and his guardian beast, proving every day that humanity's greatest strength was not in their weapons or their ships. It was in the bonds they chose to honor and the loyalty they showed to those they loved and across the galaxy. Other species were beginning to understand this truth, that civilization was measured not by conquest, but by compassion. Not by dominance, but by devotion. And not by power, but by the willingness to cross any distance to protect those who mattered most. The standoff lasted through the night and into the next day, while ships from 3 different civilizations gathered in orbit above. Tormac's Moon Commander Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical display with growing concern. Earth fleet had 5 warships, but the Krell military had responded with 12, and more were arriving every hour. This could turn into a shooting war over one kid and his dog. His tactical officer muttered, "That kid and his guardian represent everything humanity stands for," Kyle replied firmly. "We don't leave our people behind, and we sure as hell don't let anyone treat them like property." Lisa Grant had joined the fleet, and now stood beside Kyle as they opened communications with the Galactic Council mediator who had arrived to prevent conflict. The mediator was a floating being of pure energy named Luxor, who had settled thousands of disputes over his long existence. His voice resonated through the ship's speakers with ancient wisdom. "Commander Morrison, you must understand that Krell sovereignty over their territory is absolute under galactic law," Luxor began. "Your military presence here is technically an act of aggression, and kidnapping a human child isn't." Kyle shot back. "The Krell noble claims legal purchase," Luxor replied carefully. He produced documentation showing he bought the human from traders who had salvage rights to the Zenthari vessel. "Salvage rights don't apply to living beings," Lisa interjected. "And those traders were pirates who attacked and boarded that ship on the moon's surface." Danny and Kira remained in Tormac's collection room under heavy guard while the noble himself participated in the negotiations through holographic communication. Danny could see Tormac's projection arguing with other holograms, alien faces from species he didn't recognize, but he couldn't hear what they were saying. Kira had positioned herself between Danny and the guards, her body tense and ready despite the exhaustion that showed in every line of her frame. She had multiple injuries now, burns from energy weapons, cuts from her fights with the guard beasts, and bruises from throwing herself against walls and doors, but her eyes never stopped watching the guards, and her ears tracked every sound in the estate. "She's gonna fight them again if they try to separate us," Danny said quietly to himself. One of the Krell guards overheard and made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as laughter. "Your beast is impressive, but she cannot defeat all of us. She should have stayed on her human world." Danny looked up at the guard with surprising steel in his young voice. "She crossed half the galaxy to find me. Do you really think your weapons will stop her from protecting me now?" The guard's laughter died as he looked at Kira and saw the truth in Danny's words. Back in space, the freed Zenthari crew had arrived on a council rescue ship and their testimony changed. Everything Tullivan himself appeared on the communication channels, and his crystalline features showed obvious anger as he recounted the pirate attack. The Infinite Meridian was ambushed without provocation. Talvin stated, "Our crew was taken prisoner and our cargo was stolen. Anyone who purchased goods or beings from those pirates is guilty of receiving stolen property." Tormak's holographic projection flickered with what might have been worry. "I had no knowledge of piracy. I deal only with legitimate traders." "Then you were foolish as well as cruel," Talvin replied coldly. "The human boy was my guest and under my protection. You will return him immediately." The negotiations continued for hours while tensions rose in weapons. Systems on both sides charged to ready. Status Ambassador Vexter arrived with a delegation from the Galactic Council and proposed a compromise that nobody liked but everyone could accept. "There is an ancient tradition among spacefaring peoples," Vexter announced. "Trial by champion, a test of worthiness through combat between representatives." Kyle immediately objected. "You want us to risk Danny's life on some gladiator match?" "Not Danny's life," Vexter clarified. "The guardian beast against a champion chosen by Tormak if the beast wins. All charges are dropped, and the boy goes free if she loses. Humanity pays restitution to the Crow and accepts responsibility for the diplomatic incident." "That's insane," Lisa protested. Kira's already injured and exhausted from her journey. But before Kyle could reject the proposal, something unexpected happened. Kira's voice came through the communication channel. Someone had set up a camera in the collection room, and Kira had moved to stand directly in front of it while looking straight at the lens. She couldn't speak, but her body language was clear to anyone who understood pack behavior. She was accepting the challenge. Danny grabbed onto Kira's fur and shook his head desperately. "No, you don't have to do this. We'll find another way." But Kira gently pulled away from him and moved to the sealed door where she waited with obvious expectation. "The beast accepts," Tormak said with satisfaction in his voice. "And I choose my greatest champion, Drakkar, who has never been defeated in combat." The trial was set for the following day on neutral ground, a small moon that served as a diplomatic meeting place. Ships from all the major powers gathered to witness the event, and word spread quickly through the galaxy. A human guardian beast would fight for her. Humans Freedom, Kyle, and Lisa were transported down to the moon where they found Kira in a holding area. The Wolf looked up at them with tired but determined eyes and allowed Lisa to treat her wounds with medical supplies. "You don't have to do this," Lisa said softly as she cleaned and sealed a particularly bad burn on Kira's ribs. "We can find another way. Start a war if we have to." Kira made a soft sound and pressed her head against Lisa's hand, a gesture of trust and gratitude. "She knows what she's doing," Kyle said quietly. "Guardian beasts have been fighting beside humans for thousands of years. It's in her blood and her heart." Danny was brought to see Kira before the trial, and the boy collapsed beside her while crying so hard he could barely breathe. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me," Danny sobbed. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't wanted to go on that stupid trip." Kira licked his face and made gentle whining sounds until Danny calmed enough to look at her. "You really want to do this?" he asked. Kira's tail wagged once, a clear affirmative. The arena was a simple circle marked in the moon's dusty surface with thousands of beings watching from observation platforms that ringed the space. Tormak arrived with his champion, Drakkar, a creature that made even the battle-hardened human soldiers take an involuntary step back. Drakkar stood 4 meters tall on 4 legs, as thick as tree trunks, with armored plates covering its body and a massive horned head that could probably smash through steel. The creature was built for war, and it had the scars to prove it. Dozens of battles won, opponents defeated. Challenges met Kira looked tiny by comparison as she walked into the arena, but her head was high and her eyes were clear. Danny stood at the edge with Kyle and Lisa, his hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. "You can do this," he whispered. "I believe in you." Vexter gave the signal to begin and Dracor charged with a roar that shook the ground. Kira waited until the last possible second before moving. She rolled to the side with incredible speed and Dracor's horns passed through empty air where she had been standing. The fight had begun, and the galaxy was watching to see if loyalty could defeat raw power.